The Byzantine army evolved from that of the late Roman Empire. The language of the army was still Latin, but it became considerably more sophisticated in terms of strategy, tactics and organization. For example, the Byzantine army was the first army in the world to adopt combined arms task forces as part of its doctrine. Unlike the Roman legions, its strength was in its armored cavalry cataphracts, which evolved from the Clybonaria of the late empire. Infantry were still used, but mainly in support roles and as a base of maneuver for the cavalry. Most of the foot soldiers of the empire were the armored infantry scutatoi and later on, contarioi, with the remainder being the light infantry and archers of the siloi. The Byzantines valued intelligence and discipline in their soldiers far more than bravery or brawn. The rho omega mu alpha iota omicron iota sigma tau rho alpha tau iota omega tau alpha iota were a loyal force composed of citizens willing to fight to defend their homes and their state to the death, augmented by mercenaries. Infantry conscription was practiced, with every citizen eligible to serve. The training was very much like that of the legionaries, with the soldiers taught close quarters, melee techniques with their swords. But as in the late empire, archery was extensively practiced. Brief structural history. Over the course of its long history, the armies of Byzantium were reformed and reorganized many times. The only constants in its structure were its complexity and high levels of professionalism. However, the empire's military structure can be broadly divided into three periods: East Roman, thematic and tagmatic. At the fall of the Western Empire in 476, the Byzantine army was simply the surviving, eastern half of the late Roman army. Though structurally very similar to its Western counterpart, it differed in several important ways. Notably, it had more and heavier cavalry, more archers and other missile troops, and fewer foederati. These differences may have been contributing factors to the Eastern Empire's survival. It was with this East Roman army that much of the Western Empire was reconquered in the campaigns of the generals Belisarius and Narses. It was during this time, under Emperor Justinian I, that the revitalized empire reached its greatest territorial extent and the army its greatest size of over 330,000 men by 540. Later, under the general and Emperor Heraclius, the Sassanid Empire of Persia was finally defeated. Late in Heraclius' reign, however, a major new threat suddenly arose to the empire's security in the form of the Saracens. Spurred on by their new religion, Islam, which demanded the subjugation of the world or its conversion to Dar al-Islam. Driven by a still strong tribal warfare mentality, these invaders rapidly overran many of the empire's wealthiest and most important regions, especially Syria, the Levant and Egypt. This new challenge, which seriously threatened the empire's survival, compelled Heraclius and his immediate successors, in the mid-7th century, to undertake a major reform of the Byzantine military system to provide for a more cost-effective local defense of its Anatolian heartland. The result was the theme system, which served as both administrative and military divisions, each under the command of a military governor or strategos. The theme was a division-sized unit of around 9,600 stationed in the theme in which it was raised and named for. The themes were not simply garrison troops, however, but mobile field forces capable of supporting neighboring themes in defensive operations, or joining together to form the backbone of an imperial expeditionary force for offensive campaigns. It was under this new system that the Byzantine army is generally considered to have come into its own, distinct from its late Roman precursor. The thematic system proved to be both highly resilient and flexible, serving the empire well from the mid-7th through the late 11th centuries. Not only did it hold back the Saracens, but some of Byzantium's lost lands were recaptured. The thematic armies also vanquished many other foes including the Bulgars, Avars, Slavs and Varangians, some of whom eventually ended up in the service of Constantinople as allies or mercenaries. In addition to the themes, there was also the Central Imperial Army stationed in and near Constantinople called the Tagmata. The Tagmata were originally battalion-size units of guards and elite troops who protected the emperors and defended their capital city. Over time, though, their size increased to that of regiments and brigades. The number of Tagmata grew, as well. The term, thus, became synonymous with the Central Field Army. Due to growing military pressures together with the empire's shrinking economic and manpower base, the themes began to decline. As they did so, the size and importance of the Tagmata increased, due also to growing fears of the emperors over the potential dangers the strategeoir and the themes posed to their power. The final, fatal blow to the thematic army occurred in the aftermath of the disaster at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, when a new enemy, the Seljuk Turks, overran most of Asia Minor along with most of the empire's themes. Once again, the empire was forced to adapt to a new strategic reality with reduced borders and resources. Under Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, the themes were done away with and the military restructured around the Tagmata, some of which were stationed in the provinces, but the majority usually remained near Constantinople when not on campaign. Tagmata would henceforth take on yet a third meaning as a generic term for a standing military unit of regimental size or larger. This Tagmatic army, which includes those of the Komnenian and Paleologan dynasties, would serve the empire in its final stages from the late 11th to the mid-15th centuries, a period longer than the entire lifespans of many other empires. The Tagmatic armies would also prove resilient and flexible, even surviving the near destruction of the empire in the aftermath of the fall of Constantinople to the Fourth Crusade in 1204. They would eventually retake the capital for Emperor Michael VIII Paleologos in 1261, and though reduced by then to a small force, barely exceeding 20,000 men at most, would continue to defend the empire ably until the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, in no small part due to increased reliance on mercenaries from the Latin West. The later Tagmatic armies would come to resemble those of Western Europe at the time, more than their Roman, Greek or Near Eastern antecedents. Infantry types and equipment. Skoutatoi. The bulk of the Byzantine infantry were the skoutatoi, named from the word skouton, for their large oval or kite-shaped shield. Their armor and weapons included helmet. The helmet varied by region and time but was generally a simple, conical-shaped piece of steel, often with extra neck protection in the form of a mail of entail or padded coif, cavadion or vamvakan, a padded linen or wool underarmor, worn under the cuirass. Lorikion, a malar or scale hauberk, Clivanion, often associated with the characteristic Byzantine lamella cuirass. It also simply referred to armor. In addition, teruges were often attached to decorate the cuirass. Epilorikion, a padded leather or textile overgarment, worn over the cuirass. Cream's Martyr, a heavy textile skirt hanging below a soldier's cuirass. Contarion, a long spear. The contarion was used by the first ranks of each chiliakia in order to form a defensive shield wall. Skouton, a large oval shield made of wood, covered by linen or leather and edged with rawhide, with a steel boss in earlier periods. Spathion, the typical Roman spatha, a long sword, double-edged and very heavy. Later it referred to the medieval arming sword, usually with a crossguard curving back towards the handle. Paramerin, a one-edged saber-like sword, girded at the waist. Each unit had different shield decoration. Unarmored light infantrymen, often armed with javelins, were known as in classical times as peltastoi, toxotai and siloi, the standard light infantry of the empire. In each chiliakia they made up the last three lines. These soldiers, highly trained in the art of bow, were formidable archers. Most of the imperial archers came from Asia Minor, especially the region around Trebizond on the Black Sea, where they were raised, trained and equipped. Their arms included composite bow, Cavadian, Spathian or Zachurian for self-defense. Although military manuals prescribed the use of light armor for archers, cost and mobility considerations would have prohibited wide-scale implementation of this. Varangians. The Varangian Guard was a foreign mercenary force and the elite of the Byzantine infantry. It was composed principally of Norsemen, Nordic, Slavic and Germanic peoples. After 1066 it was increasingly English in composition. The Varangians served as the bodyguard of the emperor since the time of Basil II, and were generally considered to be well-disciplined and loyal so long as funds remained to pay them, although most of them brought their weapons with them when entering the emperor's service. They did gradually adopt Byzantine military dress and equipment. Their most characteristic weapon was a heavy axe, hence their designation as Pelekaiforis Frora, the axe-bearing guard. Infantry organization and formation. The primary Byzantine infantry formations were the Chiliakia, from the Greek chilia meaning thousand, because they had about 1,000 fighting men. A chiliaki was generally made up of 650 skoutatoi and 350 toxotai. The skoutatoi formed a line of 15 to 20 ranks deep, in close order shoulder to shoulder. The first line was called the konterion. The first 4 lines were made up of skoutatoi, the remaining 3 of toxotai. 3 or 4 chiliacharai formed a tagma in the later empire, but chiliaki-sized units were used throughout the empire's life. The chiliacharai were deployed facing the enemy, with the cavalry on their wings. The infantry would counter-march to make a refused center, while the cavalry would hold or advance to envelope or outflank the enemy. This was similar to the tactic Hannibal employed at Cannae. The chiliacharai were deployed not in classic checkered quincunx pattern but in a long line with enveloping flanks. Each chiliaki could assume different battle formations depending on the situation. The most common of these were line formation or phalanx, usually 8 men deep, which was generally used against other infantry or to better repel a cavalry charge. Wedge, used to break the enemy's lines. Phocon, similar to the Roman testuda, used to defend against heavy enemy missile fire. Parent axis, with 4 ranks of armored infantry in close order in the front, 4 ranks of armored infantry in close order at the back and 4 ranks of archers in between. The infantry still played an important role when the empire needed to demonstrate its strength. In fact, many battles throughout Byzantine history began with a frontal assault by the skoutatoi with support from the horse archer units known as hippotoxotai. During these assaults the infantry was deployed in the center, that consisted of 2 chiliakia in wedge formation to break enemy's line, flanked by 2 more chiliacharai in a refused wing formation, to protect the center and envelop the enemy. This was the tactic used by Nicephorus Phocas against the Bulgars in 967. Each charge was supported by toxotai that left the formation and preceded the skoutatoi in order to provide missile fire. Often, while the infantry engaged their enemy counterparts, the Klybanophori would destroy the enemy's cavalry. Byzantine infantry were trained to operate with cavalry and to exploit any gaps created by the cavalry. An effective but risky tactic was to send a chiliakia to seize and defend a high position, such as the top of a hill as a diversion, while the cataphracts or klybanophoroi, supported by the reserve infantry, enveloped the enemy's flank. The infantry was often placed in advanced positions in front of the cavalry. At the command, Apiri Spatia, the infantry would open a gap in their lines for the cavalry to charge through.